Um, I'm a theologian, but in my first life I was an artist. I was an art major in college, drawing and printmaking. And I didn't really leave art because I got sick of it or tired of it, or the fear that I couldn't make a living at it finally overwhelmed me. I just left art because I found out there was theology. So it was more of that turned my head once I knew, you could study and teach the Bible at a high level all your life. That's a thing. That's a job. Oh, I want to do that. So I completed my art degree, went on to seminary, and now work in theology. But I stay connected with art every chance I get. I'm a big museum goer. And one of the things I want to just give you some clues about is how to be a good museum goer. When you've got a day, when you go to a museum and see the paintings, what do you do? I find that people have this experience. They know they're supposed to stand in front of a painting for some time, and apparently people who like that are doing things in their minds or with their eyes while they're doing that. But it's even down to how do I stand? Where do I put my hands? Are the guards watching me? I know I'm not supposed to touch it. What else am I supposed to know here? So I'm actually going to give you 9 tips for stuff to do in front of a painting. Because maybe one of the main things to say about when you go and see paintings in a good art collection is you need some dwell time with each painting. There's probably something about our digital culture, the way our culture is visual, that we expect rapid successions of images with high entertainment value. And that's great. Every art historian I've ever studied with has said there is entertainment value to seeing lots of pictures. And so any art history lecture ought to be like extremely slow television, right? Like, oh, look, more pictures, more pictures. But one art historian who I had lectures from said, until the entertainment value wears off, and you're kind of ready for the next picture, but you're not getting it, the education part hasn't happened, right? So it's a question of how do you get that dwell time in front of each picture. So I want to give you some tips for that. And my way of getting into that is through this artist, Henry Ossawa Tanner. This is kind of an exciting time for Henry Tanner's legacy and heritage. He was a major, important painter at the time. He was famous. He's got pretty good credibility to be the first important and famous African-American painter. And so he went from America, he studied in America, Pennsylvania, and then went to France, largely for social cultural reasons. He and his family, he had a mixed-race marriage, they felt more comfortable in France in various ways. And so if you see his timeline there, 1859 to 1937, he's a little boy when the Civil War starts, and he's an adult through the First World War, and dies while the Second World War is ramping up. So that's kind of where he is, and you can kind of fill in some of the blanks there on what's going on culturally in his life. But he painted genre scenes, so some sort of domestic scenes, and we'll see a couple of those. 2 of his early greatest hits were domestic scenes of African-American family life. And these were the big breakout sort of hit singles that he had early in his career. And everyone kept saying, paint more of those genre scenes of domestic life. And he had kind of moved on to, I want to paint Bible scenes mostly. He was always very ambitious. There's a great story about him as a kid where he saw someone painting out in the park in Philadelphia. And as soon as he saw it, he thought, oh, that's a thing? That's what I've got to do. He had that experience. And he told his dad, I'm going to be that. And then his ambition was, he wanted to know what field he could go into where he could be the greatest at it. So first he thought, I'm going to paint seascapes, and I'm going to be the greatest seascape painter ever. Then he discovered animals were fun to paint, and he announced, I will be the greatest animal painter of all time. And so his ambition kind of moved on from thing to thing. I think he's got a pretty good case for being one of the greatest Bible painters of all time. So not so much a Bible illustrator. He's not just taking a scene and illustrating it, but he's really working at a high level of fine arts, craftsmanship, making large, artful paintings of scenes from Scripture. So I want to jump into that, and I'm going to rapidly go through, I'm going to kind of skip through some of his biographical stuff just to say he was a painter's painter. His life story is basically where he studied, who he studied with. He studied with Thomas Eakins, if you're into the history of American art. This is a on the left here is a painting of him that's in the Art Institute of Chicago by another artist. So if you go to the Art Institute, there's one large Tanner painting on display. It's the 2 disciples at the tomb, and we'll see that in a minute. And then in the next room over in the American wing, you can see this painting of him. And then there's a portrait of him in later life and a photo of him. Here's a couple more. He was famous enough at some point to have a stamp, so that's good. Oh, so he's kind of making a comeback right now. When I first looked at, so when I was in art school, I never heard of Tanner. He might have had like one little bit on one little page of one of the art surveys. It just kind of bypassed. Partly because it's just not cool to paint domestic scenes and Bible pictures. Like, that's not artsy. And when you're in art school and they're training the future artist in the great heritage of painting, there's a kind of a snobbery that overlooks domestic scenes and Bible illustrations because they're not adequately high art. But partly just by virtue of his greatness and the fact that he's well represented in so many fine American collections, and partly by virtue of the fact that, well, he's the first great African-American painter, we probably ought to give some more attention to him. He's sort of pushed his way back into the limelight, and there have been some major retrospectives. 2012 was kind of a turning point year where you can now find a lot more Henry Tanner books out there, a lot more Henry Ossawa Tanner shows, and the images are online now finally, so that's great. A strange middle name, Ossawa. In this age, any name that's Googleable is a big benefit, right? If your name is just kind of a standard name, you're going to get lost. But Ossawa is a strange name. It's a made-up name that his mom and dad made up. It's from Osawatomie, Kansas, which is where John Brown lived. So we'll come to that. And actually, Osawatomie itself is a made-up word put together from Osage and Potawatomi, Osawatomie, Kansas. And that's where John Brown killed 5 guys and really started his anti-slavery kind of, is that domestic terrorism or whatever it is? It's where John Brown really took a stand and got things going. And so his dad, Henry Tanner's dad, who was a bishop in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, named his son Henry Ossawa Tanner. So it kind of gives you a little clue into, oh, that's interesting. It's a godsend if you're researching him because nothing else on the internet is Ossawa except this guy, right? So it's wonderful. Henry Tanner, you could get lost, you could look around. It's kind of hard to research his dad because lots of people were named Tanner. But okay, well, I'm going to jump right into how to look at art, and then we'll build some of Henry Ossawa Tanner's background and biography into that as we go. Like I said, when you go to the art gallery and you're standing there and trying to spend some time with it, you're thinking, what do I do? Where do I put my hands? Do I put them in my pockets? Do I put them behind me? Should I stroke my chin and look thoughtful? Well, here's what you should do. I think you should, when you're standing in front of a painting and trying to spend enough dwell time with it, you should squint at it. You should flip it over, not physically. Let me say that right now. Don't physically spin the thing over. You should find negative space. We'll go back into each of these. Catch the moment. Remake it, give up your eyes, say what you see, bring in background knowledge, and then consider worldview. These are 9 things that you can do in front of a painting. And by the way, you don't do this with every painting. This is kind of basic museum survival skills. When you go in, you look around one of the large rooms. The art on the wall is artsy, of course, but the curation of the room is also a work of art in itself. A good museum curator is functioning at a very high level of what goes where. And he or she has made decisions about what paintings can you only see up close? What paintings can you see 3 rooms away and then kind of take a journey towards? What paintings are beside each other and in dialogue with each other? How close should they be? All those things are important parts of the visual experience. But what you do is you walk in one of the rooms, you look around, you give everything a quick glance, you just kind of randomly find one that catches your fancy. You think, I want to spend some time with that one. And then you go to that. You're not doing that with the other 20 paintings in the room. You're making an investment in one, right? So once you've done that, once you've kind of gotten out of the speed dating round and you've decided to commit to actually like spend some time getting to know this painting, these are the things to do. When I say squint at it, I'm sorry, let me say one more thing before we go through these in detail. These 9 things, and I'll say this again at the end, these 9 things are arranged in 3 triads. It's not like the Trinity, I like organizing in 3s. The first 3, squint, flip, find negative space, are very much about just addressing the visual experience of the thing. Just you walk up to it and what is this thing in front of me and how do I just get to know what is here? We tend to think of images as just immediately giving all of themselves to you. You know what I mean? Like a sentence or a poem or a book, you have to work your way through. A movie, you have to commit to 90 minutes of. We feel like a painting should just be, boom, here I am, okay, next. In fact, time with a painting is a crucial element of what's going on. And so these first three are just clues to how to make sure your eyes are catching what's there. The middle three, catch the moment, remake it, and give up your eyes, are about entering a little more into the dynamics of it and building a little more understanding in. Then the bottom three are much more intellectual. This is where you're engaging the understanding, you're narrating, you're connecting categories, you're beginning to philosophize. So it's a scale. It gets more complicated and it gets more intellectual as you go. Yeah, it's more purely aesthetic at the top, and it's more philosophical at the bottom. And all of that's valid, right? Humans are animals with souls. Yeah, and so we've got an animal connection to paintings. We've got a visual, physical, earthy kind of that color makes me angry kind of connection to paintings. And then we've got I understand what's going on. Yeah, so we're trying to feed both sides, trying to do the whole human spectrum. There's probably a philosophy of education buried in here, but I don't know. I just want to look at the art. Okay. So squint at it. When I say squint at it, I'm talking about the kind, we squint for two reasons. I'm talking about the kind of squinting that blurs something. So sometimes you squint to see things more clearly. Other times you can squint in a way that kind of drops the shades down over your eyes and puts things into blurry state. If you're nearsighted, you've got an advantage here. You can just take your glasses off instead. And I can't see any of you. You are all blurry. And as blurry, there's a lot of information lost, but then there's a lot of information gained. I think more about what color clothes you're all wearing when I can't actually make eye contact with you. Yeah, that's the kind of blurring we're looking for. So here's a famous painting, The Thankful Poor. And so you can practice squinting at it in a way that blurs your eyes, right? You look at it so that you can't see it as well. In case this is the first time you've tried that, I've blurred it for you. Oh, yeah, so blurry. Now, obviously, we lost a ton of information when we blurred it out. But we gained a couple of things. We got the big picture. Since you've stolen the details from yourself, it gives you back the big picture. And you can begin to make some observations about what's going on. Where are the major forms and masses there? It actually seems to me, one of the things that jumps out at me when I blur my eyes at The Thankful Poor, is the boy on the right side of the table looms much larger physically. Because of the way he is and the shadows and the chair and everything, he takes up as much space as the man. When the details are here, go back to that. No, I want to just go back. There we go. When the details are here, it seems to me the man looms larger in the painting. But in fact, in terms of visual real estate being taken up, Tanner has planned it so that they're much more equal. Now, the full-grown man is taller. He's higher in the picture plane. The other thing that you notice here is the colors. Just like when I blur my eyes at you, I notice what you're wearing more. The colors here, it's a very restrained, very muted palette of colors. He's very disciplined about how many colors he's using. But you do have kind of the light, creamy colors at the top and the darker colors, browner colors, congregate towards the bottom. Now, all of that's available to you when you see it like this. But because everything else is also there, you kind of miss the big picture. So squinting at it, blurring your eyes is a way of getting that big picture. By the way, here's another. Do I have a close-up on that? I don't, but I can go there if I want to. This is a study for The Thankful Poor, which is at the Du Sable Museum here in Chicago. So notice that the reason I show you this is not just because it's local, but because you can see that the painter actually is thinking in terms of large blocks of things before detail. That in a study, the thing he knew he had to get right is where do the big shapes and colors go. Then he can go in and pay more attention to everything that he wants to. But by squinting at it and getting the big picture first, you're entering into the experience of the painter's constructing of it. Okay, well, more could be said, but I want to go to another thing you can squint at. Tanner is uniquely the kind of painter who kind of squints at his own paintings for you. So especially as he gets greater mastery of what he wants to do as an artist and greater financial success so that he can afford to do whatever he wants to do as an artist. This is a painting of Sodom and Gomorrah, fleeing Sodom and Gomorrah. And you can see this is a pretty good reproduction of it. If you're kind of looking around going, it seems out of focus, I can't focus on anything. This is a case where the artist has intentionally left it at a low level of finish so that you have to take in the big picture. So that we're interested in the human figures, but the landscape with its horizontal stripes of bright colors are the things that get you. You can still blur your eyes at this, and there's an advantage to that. It sort of looks like a flag or a scarf or something, right? Or 2 or 3 scarves kind of stacked on top of each other. That's what he's going for. With Tanner, especially a painting like this, it's largely about the color. Let me just say, is this autobiographical? Let me say, as an artist and as an art critic and as someone who looks at a lot of art, I'm best at structure and form, meaningful form, and worst at color. So I'm a little bit out of my league here talking about Tanner, who mainly is about color, right? So I'm bringing sort of everything I've got to understanding Tanner, but he's at this high level of what he's doing with color, just screaming along. I'm not saying I'm colorblind or anything, but in terms of my appreciation of color differences, I just can't even perceive some of the things that really great painters perceive. They are seeing things that don't even register for me. When I was in art school, I'm painting the human figure and in a painting class, and I think, yep, here it is. I'm using these 3 colors because that's what I see. And my painting teacher comes along and says, really? That's all the color you see in that human figure? I was like, yeah, pretty much. So he went and got a giant yellow towel and held it up behind the model and said, now what do you see? And I said, oh, there's like yellow all over the model's body. Right. Okay, now watch this. And he held up a giant blue tarp behind the model. I said, oh, look at how much blue there is in the model. So we did that a few times, and it helped me a lot. Kind of jump-started my color awareness. But then I looked around and realized, wait, the other 14 people in the class are all seeing that all the time? That's okay. Like, I need special assistance to perceive all that color. Tanner is at that level of things. Anyway, a little close-up here. Striking, of course, that Lot's wife is represented by not being represented, right? Probably she's either a white blob of paint or a blank spot on the canvas. And he's painted almost nothing in terms of detail, right? But you can, if you know the story, if you're studying the image, you get it. Okay, flip it over. Now, you can't literally flip this over, so people who go to art museums with me know not to grab the painting and flip it over. There are guards there for a reason. But what you can do is turn your head as much as possible so that you can see what's going on in the painting. Here's what flipping it over does. It scrambles your ability to read it as a representational image, and it kind of turns every painting into an abstract painting. Yeah? No, I like watching everyone try to flip it over, but again, digitally I can flip it over for you. When you flip it over, of course you lose a lot immediately. You lose the ability to read it clearly and straightforwardly, but you gain an awareness of the dynamics that are going on in the painting. Again, where he's put the different bands of color stand out. When I flip it over, I immediately pick up on the yellow rectangle that is now to our left. I didn't really see that before. I think, come on, go back. I think the reason I didn't really see that yellow before, and once you've seen it, it's striking. It's tempting to say it's the main thing going on. But the representational image, it's a man and a boy and a banjo, and it's right there, and there's interesting objects to look at, and that draws you in first. And it actually hurries you past some of the main visual dynamics going on. So one way to, this sounds zen, but our earliest exercises here, squint at it, flip it over, things like that, these are trying to shut down the chattering mind, which is telling you what to see before your eyes are actually being allowed to see it. Yeah? We're going to move towards an intelligent viewing of it, but we actually want a non-intelligent, merely visual encounter with the art at first. So when I could go into detail about some of the things that are showing up here. I think there's a jaggedness here in what I'll call in the next step the negative space between the heads and the banjo. There's that, it's like the letter W or something, right? That's really striking. Okay, well, yeah.
So in a case like this, like if the focal point of the picture to us seems to be the banjo and the father or the people together,
yeah.
Like that, why does the artist put something else prominent in the picture that's not part of the thing? Is that like
yeah.
We're not understanding or I'm not understanding?
Yeah, it's a good question. So if the main thing going on is the two figures interacting with the musical instrument, why does the artist, why can we now tell that the artist has these other interests going on, right? A shadow in the background, a yellow rectangle. It's because there's painting as a visual phenomenon, and then there's illustration. And an artist like Tanner has both going on. But that's exactly the kind of reason that a lot of modern artists will do non-representational stuff. They won't illustrate anything. They may paint a still life or a human figure, but they won't let a story be attached to it. Because for a lot of artists, once the story's there, you lose your ability to do whatever you want to with the visuals, right? If you're hired to illustrate a Bible story, by golly, it better be a clear, direct Bible illustration. And Tanner doesn't reject the power of illustration, but he also thinks, let's see, he's written about this. Tanner says that the artist, the biblical artist, serves the biblical story best, not just by producing an illustration of what's in the text, but by doing all the other stuff around it too, like the visual phenomena that we're talking about. Yeah. Because there's a kind of a bottom line mentality that can creep in if all you're there to do is illustrate the story. If you're serving the text in that way, in like pure abject service, then you could say, why worry? Why work hard on the color mixing? Why really invest in what kind of color palette you're using? All that matters is that you can see a banjo and a guy. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's upside down. And by the way, while we're here on this image, the banjo lesson, the top is an actual photo reference that Tanner used, and then the bottom is, I think, a magazine illustration that Tanner produced for Harper's. And so you can see him kind of approaching it differently, in a very, he's got a photographic reference, and then he's got a much more straightforward illustratorly kind of way of doing it. But when he goes for a large canvas that's a full color painting, I say full color, but one of the things to notice here is, again, how disciplined he's being with his color range. The skin tones, the clothing, the instrument, the wall, the floor, everything's kind of the same color palette. Yeah. What size is it? That's a great question. I don't know. Yeah. I'm actually not even sure where it is. I'd like to see it. It is great to see Tanner paintings in person. They don't reproduce especially well. That was something that was really a problem for him. In 1905, printing being what it was, he would make these amazing paintings. He'd be in Harper's Weekly or the Ladies' Home Journal, but it would just be kind of this muddy little 8x10 thing. You go, that's a great painting? Then you see one in person, and sometimes it's just revelatory. Yeah. The third step is to find negative space. I want to explain this a little bit. It's kind of an art school way to talk, but, do I have a definition? Oh, it's right there. The term negative space refers to the opposite of solid objects. It describes the spaces left open around the objects and the empty hollows within them. It's an art theorist named Rudolf Arnheim. So negative space, this is a visual phenomenon we're talking about. Here's my hand. The negative space around my hand, see these little fingers that aren't here that are going down into my fingers that are here? That's the negative space around my hand. This is super important for art students because if you want to draw my hand, you can, try to do the outline of a contour drawing of my hand. But once you attend to the fact that this shape right here is a real shape, it's a shape that's not a shape, right? It's this kind of like, whoa, look at the non-thumb between his thumb and his finger. Once you actually figure out what this shape is, it makes my thumb and finger the right shape, and it makes the distance between them right. So hands are just terrible. There's so much information in hand. It's why a lot of artists will hide hands whenever they can, because why? It's so much work, and all you get's a hand for it. I mean, the hand's usually not the main point. You're trying to do the face, but as soon as you get the hands, there's 19 knuckles there. There's so much information. This finger right here, right? It's a different kind of finger. It's too broad at the bottom, but there's a ghostly hand holding my hand. Yeah, it's weird. But this is negative space. Super important for artists for the way they compose things. I think I might have locked up here. That's bad news. That was Superman. Oh no. I might have to shut down and restart or I got no show. Or we can, to recap what we've seen so far, these are the 9 steps. I thought you might want to review them real quickly here. You could squint at it. Yeah, you know what we should do? We should flip it over, but not literally. Okay, negative space. So, this is all we're here is the doggy. This is a doggy. This is the negative space around a doggy. See how that works? It really is kind of like a puzzle. It's the other half of reality. It's the opposite of solid objects, but when you're talking about visual representation, it's as important as everything else. This is, of course, the negative space and the object going together. Once you learn how to spot this stuff, it's everywhere, of course. This room, we mainly focus on the objects, but think about the space above your heads. Like there's more space there. And if we were to seal all the exits and fill the room with concrete and then chip away all the objects out of the concrete left would be the negative space around all of us as objects. Yeah? And that's what painters and artists have to be keyed into. It's invisible, but it's the other half of reality. Here's a sculpture from 2500 BC. It's a cyclotic harpist. Check out the negative space there in the sculpture. Obviously, the sculptor didn't today I'm working on the rock, tomorrow I'm going to work on the negative space. No, you work on the rock and the space at the same time. It's all one. Then there's, of course, the negative space around the object, and then you could just drop out the object, and you would just have the negative space. The negative space kind of is the object where the object's not. Yeah? Okay. Well, this is a big thing for looking at paintings. This is the two disciples at the tomb that's at the Art Institute of Chicago. This is a very large painting. This must be about 5 feet tall. It's a good one to see. What you can see is, especially because you've got two figures beside each other, there's a negative space between them that sort of dictates how close they are to each other, both left to right on the visual plane and front to back in the implied depth of field that's in this painting. John is in the front. John, the disciple, is always portrayed as the beardless disciple. And then Peter is in the back. And if you know the story at the end of John, it's a strange story. They both run to the tomb. John gets there first, he lets you know. But then he stops and Peter goes in first, yeah? Well, you could say a lot about this. One thing to say about the negative space here is it relates the two of them in a certain way. And of course, the whole painting is in some ways about, whoops, let me go back, sorry. The whole painting is really about empty space, because of course they're at the tomb. And the most important thing going on at that tomb is there's nothing in it. And so Tanner has left a lot of open space on this canvas and just the two figures in it. One of the things that I think is really interesting about this is the next thing we're going to do is called Catch the Moment. And one of the things to do about catching the moment is to figure out exactly what instant is being portrayed in the still image. So imagine it like it's a movie, and then you stop it somewhere. But the question is, where do you stop it? Because if you had stopped it 3 frames later, you'd have a different image. Well, with this one, exactly what's happening here. Are they going in? Are they coming out? The other thing about catching the moment is to kind of, you put yourself physically in the position of the human figures you're looking at. What you notice here is that Peter is looking down and John is looking up. And it's one of the really striking things about it. Once you've picked up on this happening, it kind of feels like the main thing about the painting is why they're looking at two different things. They're at the same empty tomb. They're witnesses. They're important biblical witnesses to the resurrection of Christ, but their eyes are directed at different things. Peter's looking at where Jesus is not, and John is looking up. John, the glow of the empty tomb is more on the face of John. There's a lot going on there, right? I don't have a sermon to preach about this, but I could. Yeah, okay. Well, we're kind of taking a jump forward into Catch the Moment, and I already introduced it. Catch the Moment really is about saying, in a painting with humans in it, asking exactly what moment is being portrayed here. So this is a young apprentice making wooden shoes, and here's one way to talk about catching the moment. You picture it as a movie. You can stop here or here or here, and whichever one you stop at, paintings are still images, so that's going to be the thing you look at. Do you think this young man is leaning into it or drawing back from the work right now? Is there forward force going on here, or is he done with the forward force and he's pulling back a little bit? I mean, probably most people would say leaning into it. But once you entertain the fact that you might be looking at another moment, you think, there are kind of odd physical dynamics, right? And then, of course, putting yourself in the physical position that he's in, one thing you'll usually notice when you do that is the figures are more active than you think they are. You have to bend over more. You have to bend your legs more than you thought. When I first look at him, I think, okay, he's going like this. The more I try to actually get in his position, the more I think, well, that back leg is really far back. Actually, his hands are further apart than I thought. This is probably good use of the tool, right? He's got his hands as far apart on the turning tool. It's some kind of a manual drill thing. Yeah, if the hands are really close together, that wouldn't work. So they've got to be like this. You can feel your muscles flex when you do that. It's really about catching that moment, because the artist could have done anything, and what he did was this. Here's a study for it. Do you think it's the same exact moment portrayed? I find it really interesting when I get to see an artist study for a painting. It often seems like a slightly different moment that he's captured. And with this one, Tanner was after lots of different things. So he tried lots of different ways of getting at this. What if I pointed him the other way? What if I had the boy more behind? In this case, I had him more behind the tool as opposed to out here from the tool. Yeah. Okay. The main thing that this does is it heightens your awareness of the actual moment portrayed as opposed to all the other things that could have been portrayed. Yeah. Okay. The next one's a large category called remake it. So you're standing in front of a painting, you're trying to figure out, well, I'm supposed to spend a little more time here. How much more can I spend? Well, one thing you can do is remake it with your eyes. And what I mean by that is gather clues from the image you're looking at about the process that went into making it. Now, this is going to be different with different art forms, and it's going to be different based on your background knowledge of how things are made. With Tanner, and by the way, there he is with his palette in front of him, and here is his studio. This kind of brings to mind the fact that this object was made by a human, and there are some Tanner paintings that they don't look like they were made by a human hand. He can sometimes get such a clean, smooth polish on the surface of a painting that you think, how did a guy with brushes do that? So you have to kind of stare at it, look for not mistakes, but places where the craftsmanship is evident. You know, there are moments like in a Rembrandt painting where you think, it's like a photo, but better. It's like he's here. I have no idea how to get into how this was made. But then you look over at the side and say, oh, that little thing on his shoulder. I can see the brush strokes there. I can see how he put that together. Often, painters are spending thousands of hours in the studio. They will often leave you clues for what the craftsmanship looked like. And with Tanner, it really all comes down to studying his brush strokes, because he's a very flexible artist, very accomplished artist, highly academically trained. He could kind of do anything he wanted to. And throughout his career, he painted in lots of different styles. So if you look him up, they'll call him different things in the brief art history reference books. Like he's a realist painter, he's a genre painter, he's a Bible illustrator, he's a romantic painter. None of them quite fit, but he is working in all those modes all the time. So here's a little study he did. It's a biblical scene, Christ washing the disciples' feet. The reason I show it to you is it's unfinished, it's unpolished. You can see the brush strokes. You can kind of see how he's roughing things in. Something like this is going on behind all his paintings, right? That he's kind of roughing things in this way and then building out more of a finish. This is the first truly jumbo painting, Tanner painting that I saw. It's in Philadelphia. And it's very large. It must be 8 feet wide. It's big. It's the Annunciation. We'll come back to it right at the very end. I want to show you something about it in terms of background knowledge. But here's Mary and the angels appearing to her. I just want to, since I was there, I took the closest pictures I was allowed to take without getting in trouble with the guards. So here's the top left. This is behind the glowing angel. We're close enough that you can see the brush strokes, right? That little, was it an urn or an amphora or a vase or whatever that's on the shelf behind the angel? You can actually count the brush strokes, theoretically, right? You could say, Henry Tanner made that with 13 brush strokes. Like, there's that one that goes like that, but before that he did boom, boom, boom in the middle. Like, you can actually see how that thing was put together. This is the value, and this is when you go to the gallery, and someone who seems to know a lot more about art than you is standing like this going, yeah. They're not just pretending to understand art. They're generally staring at a brushstroke. like generally they picked up on, I see how that is put together. They're kind of remaking it in their mind. Yeah? Here's part of Mary's bed. This just, like if I hadn't shown you that this was from the Annunciation painting and you didn't know this was a blanket on a bed, it looks like it should be from a cooking show or something, right? It looks like maybe some bread dough or maybe like some butter or something. Like I don't know what it is. But again, you can count the brush strokes, right? You can see what's going on in there. Especially with Tanner, you want to be able to see how he constructed the image. So, okay, a lot more could be said there, but this is where you get all the cool images. You know how wine tasters always have these like, oh, it's got a presumptuous bouquet and legs, and you go, are you really tasting all that? I don't taste that. And then sometimes people talking about the visual arts can be like that, right? Like, oh yes, this passage is very painterly and lyrical. This passage is painterly and lyrical? Are you just saying stuff to sound smart? But in fact, when you're staring at actual brush strokes, you do start to think, well, there is something like oleaginous or unctuous about this. There's something kind of like oily almost going on here. I almost want to it feels like finger painting. I want to touch it. Yeah, anyway, this is where a lot of great stuff can be seen in the paintings. Okay, we'll move on from this. Give up your eyes is a crucial one. This kind of goes to stewardship of the eyes. Here's Daniel in the lion's den. When you're dealing with a masterful artist, this sounds snobby or elitist to say, but this doesn't work with just anybody. You can't do this with just any piece of art. But when you become aware, for some reason, that you're looking at art by someone who is really in charge, someone who's really at the top of the game, it's Rembrandt, it's Van Gogh, it's Henry Ossawa Tanner, it's someone like that, someone at that scale, you can actually come to it and say, I am not qualified to use my eyes well. This artist is, and if I just look where the artist is directing me to look with the visual clues in the actual painting, that's what's going to work. I'm going to surrender the use of my eyes to the structural forces put in play by this artist. That's the thing to do. And this is where when you take an art appreciation class, the professor will draw circles on the image or lines or triangles or things. You go, are you sure you see those triangles and lines in there? Yeah, because what they're analyzing is the visual forces in the painting and the way the artist is directing your eyes. Now this one's pretty dark. So let me just kind of zoom in on the middle here. Of course it's dark because it's the lion's den, so that's one thing. But again, I care a lot about how Daniel looks. I'm interested in that. I'd like to see him. Guess what? I am not allowed to see Daniel. Henry Ossawa Tanner is in charge. I am just going to submit to his leadership and what I should be doing with my eyes in this painting. And apparently I should not be looking at Daniel. I can't tell you. He's got a beard, I think I can tell. I can't tell much else about that. I can say a little more about the lion's face. And for some reason, where the shaft of light, where the rectangle of light falls is where I'm supposed to be looking. And it's not for some reason like, oh, he's holding a Bible verse there or something like that. It's because that's where the artist wants me to look. If I decide to get rebellious and think I'm more interested in the top right corner, well, guess what? There's nothing to see there. The artist has made it as boring as possible. Sometimes the artist, since it's a painting, will even blur it. El Greco, I think, is famous for this. He'll make a whole wonderful little painting, then he'll just blur the heck out of it, physically with his brush. He'll just mess it all up. So when you go and look at it and think, I want to look at these people in the background, you can't. He intentionally blurred them. So a master artist is always going to be in charge of kind of where the compositional forces are going, what lines lead you into the painting, which ones lead you out of the painting. Well, more could be said about that, but there's a lot going on there. I think I have another. Oh yeah, this is my favorite Tanner painting. This is Jesus and Nicodemus from John 3. And Jesus is, Nicodemus comes to Jesus by night, and Jesus says, you must be born again. You know the story from John 3. Tanner imagines it happening on a rooftop in the evening. So it's night, but it's not the pitch black of night. There's obviously light going on downstairs, and that seems to be in some ways what Tanner is most interested in this painting. The coolest thing going on here is light coming up the stairs towards Nicodemus from downstairs illumination. If I want to look really hard at Jesus, and one of the reasons I've stared really hard at the Christ image in this painting is I think there's ethnicity question that's sort of live here. Like, is that big, tall, white Jesus from headshots from Hollywood in the 50s? No. Well, is it black Jesus, like African American? No. And the more you stare, the more you want to stare harder at it, but he's in shadow. The light's actually not hitting him. Tanner has intentionally put him there. All roads kind of lead to him in terms of the visual dynamics and forces of the painting, but once you get there, you can't really dwell on it. Tanner has not constructed here a portrait of the face of Jesus that's rewarding to look at. He's really emphasized the space between Jesus and Nicodemus and what's going on there. Nicodemus is lower than Jesus because he's receiving instruction, though he is a teacher in Israel and is a member of the synagogue. By the way, here are a couple of studies of it in which you see on the left, Nicodemus being lower than Jesus was a big idea for Tanner in the painting. That was important. It's a little restrained in the final painting, but Jesus is taller. And then he had this other idea where he thought, what if like the full moon was coming up behind Jesus like a halo and you couldn't see his face at all? That would be another way I could do this. So you can see him playing here in the studies with different ways of portraying it. But again, the key thing here is give up control of your eyes. So if you find that you've brought your own interest to the painting and you want to see what's going on, remember that if you know you're dealing with a master, go ahead and surrender your eyes and let them direct your eyes to where they think your eyes ought to be. Yeah? Again, if that sounds elitist, it's sometimes I watch movies and like 10 or 15 minutes in, I think the person who made this is an idiot and I don't trust them to control the next 90 minutes of my life. And I think they're also sloppy and this is bad craftsmanship. And I don't think that I'm going to be visually instructed by watching this, so I'm going to bail on this movie. On the other hand, sometimes I watch a movie and like 10 or 15 minutes in, I realize, oh, this person knows what's going on. I'm in for a ride, and I'm going to really surrender to this movie. There's a kind of a critical element to that, right? Where you just realize you're watching something not worth watching. Once you realize, though, you're in the hands of someone who's a real master, go with it. Okay, say what you see. This is where, I mentioned earlier that the first few exercises were about turning off your chattering mind. This is where you officially turn back on your chattering mind and begin just narrating to yourself what it is you're looking at. Here is the angel, or no, that's Daniel the lion's den. Already looked at that a bit. Let's move on to, we've gone back in time. Okay. Oh yeah, there we go. This is the angel appearing to the shepherds. Now, you can do the first 7 steps with it, right? You can blur your eyes, flip it over, etc. But then once you get to say what you see, it literally is about saying, there is a blurry thing on the left that I think might be an angel. Oh, look, human figures on the lower right. Actually, most of what's in this image, it seems to be a rocky cliff. It's mostly a landscape. So you start describing it that way and saying it. I've found out that when police interview eyewitnesses of an account, they decide there's 2 kinds of people in the world. One kind of person just sees stuff happen, and then when you cross-examine or interrogate them about it, they have to kind of find ways to say what was going on because they had not been thinking about words, they'd just been seeing stuff. The other kind of person is sort of always narrating everything they see, like, I'm coming up to the intersection, as I turn left, I see a red truck. Like, there's actually a kind of person who's sort of constantly writing a novel in their mind with a kind of low-level verbal narration of all events that are happening. And if you ask them what happens, they replay for you the tape of what they were narrating in your mind. It's like a temperament disorder, like your Myers-Briggs or your Enneagram or something. There's 2 kinds of people, constant narrators and non-narrators. This is the point at which, in looking at the painting, you go ahead and kind of prime the pump by making yourself talk about what you're seeing. Because often, in just describing it, just going like, oh, there's the shepherds. That was a big deal, right? That was kind of a breakthrough moment in just naming it. So this is about attaching some labels to it, naming it, identifying what's going on, saying what you're seeing. Okay, hi shepherds, bye shepherds. Okay. Similarly, this is the raising of Lazarus, and it's a busy composition. There's a lot going on in it, and if you've already read the label, you know it's the raising of Lazarus, so you're looking for Lazarus. You can identify him, you can find Jesus. This is, by the way, a study for it in which I think it's fair to say the figure of Jesus is more prominent. Okay. Bring in background knowledge. So here's the Annunciation again. There's two kinds. I'm going to talk about two kinds of background knowledge. The first is art history background knowledge. The second is biography. So this is the Annunciation, but here's an Annunciation painting by Simone Martini from 1333. Some similarities and some differences. One of the things you notice is, the gold color. So when Tanner's painting, he could actually be thinking, there are hundreds and hundreds of years of paintings of the Annunciation. I'm about to make one, a big important one. How is it related to previous images? So one thing you notice is, of course, the angel is literally there. The angel kind of blends in gold into the background. And in Martini's painting, the background is literally gold. It's gold leaf. It's actually thin hammered gold on the background. So it's interesting to think about what Tanner's doing with the art historical tradition. Yeah? Mary's got, in Martini's painting, Mary's got this kind of like, what, who, me? Kind of a physical posture. Little different, stated a little bit differently in what Tanner's doing. Oh man, I think I just locked up again. Wow. This doesn't happen to me with my Prezi Road show with my three-faced Superman. Oh, we're in our last 5 minutes here too. Oh, there we go. Well, this is Fra Angelico, and you get a much better control of the palette. And then there's some Counter-Reformation painting, which is like this gorgeous, like, hello, I'm an angel. Compared to that one, you see how restrained and cautious and understated, and we would want to say realistic, right? You almost feel like with this Tanner painting, you almost could have taken a photo of it if you were there, right? There's Mary. The angel is only represented as a column of golden light that's kind of transfiguring everything around him. So one form of background knowledge is art historical background. The more art you see, the more qualified you are to see more art. So it's cumulative and it builds. And a painter like Tanner is thinking about the history of previous representations. I actually think that in Tanner's output, he's at his best when he's painting Bible scenes that haven't been painted hundreds and hundreds of times. And I think he kind of knows that, because if you go through your standard scenes from the life of Jesus, they're going to be painted by every major painter from the Byzantines through Giotto on down. Tanner kind of avoids those and goes for some other quieter scenes that don't have a long history of representations behind him. In that sense, he's trying to do something new. So obviously he's deeply traditional. He's a faithful Bible illustrator, but he's also trying to find room for his own contribution. The other form of background knowledge is just biography, where you could actually study the guy's life. So this is Henry Tanner's dad, Bishop B.T. Tanner, bishop in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. He's not the founder of the church, but the founder of the AME Church Review, a magazine, which was a very important African American magazine in the 19th century. This is a painting that Tanner did of his dad. His dad wrote theological lectures. I'm interested. And they're interesting theological lectures. I don't know if you can read them. It says, Benjamin Tucker Tanner, Doctor of Divinity, author of Apology for African Methodism, Origin of the Negro, and Is the Negro Cursed, as well as Outlines of History. He also wrote The Color of Solomon. What? My Beloved is White and Ruddy, a monograph. Bishop Tanner's stuff is fascinating. There is obviously at this time, late 19th century, some racist scholarship on the history of Bible origins, and the Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and the curse on Ham and the curse on Canaan. Southern theologians arguing that this is a direct line to why dark-skinned people are rightly to be enslaved. There's racist Bible scholarship out there. Bishop Tanner, with a doctorate of divinity, he named his son Ossawa, and he is heavily involved in generating counter-scholarship to demonstrate the actual place of the Negro race within the Shem, Ham, Japheth biblical genealogies and chronologies. And he's got some interesting theories, and they align in interesting ways with the other scholarship that's out there. I bring this up as background for Tanner because Tanner visited northern Africa and painted people there, because if you notice the people we've seen in these scenes, they're not like blonde, they're not Norwegians, as we get in some Bible illustrations, but they're also not African American. He decided, well, if you really wanted to have historical interest in New Testament times, everyone would look more or less like they do in Tunisia or Morocco. That's kind of what people would look like. And so that's kind of who you're getting. This is interesting background information, of course, for looking at Tanner's figures, because here's a closest he's got to a portrait of Christ. This is called the Savior. And if you raise the race question when looking at this portrait of Christ, you think, what ethnicity is he exactly? Around 1900, the idea that you would hire someone from North Africa, like Tunisia, Morocco, somewhere in there, to kind of be the figure for the biblical people you were painting, that was a new and interesting idea. And Tanner, I think there is drawing on some of the work of his father. That's the kind of stuff that would be alive in his work. Okay, I just want to say briefly on Consider Worldview, you have to look at a lot of an artist's stuff to be able to even think about a worldview. If you look at one painting and say, I know what he lives for, you're probably wrong. This is why it's important when a major gallery or museum will say, we're having a huge show of so-and-so, and there's 100 paintings by this person. Well, the reason that's great is it's an opportunity to see lots of paintings by the person, so that cumulatively you can begin to understand what matters to him, what he's doing, and why. This is in Pittsburgh. This is Jesus in the home of Mary and Martha. This is a little painting he did from the end of Luke, and then he vanished from their sight. So this is a Jesus painting with Jesus not in it. I mention these to say, I think you can see in Tanner's work a real faith commitment to the presence of Jesus in the contemporary world, so that when he's painting scenes from the Gospels, he's not doing it merely as a historical painter, but he's actually got some spiritual and theological commitment to the presence of Jesus here and now. So that's a more worldview-ish thing, right? You can't directly paint that. You need to spend some time with Tanner to see what he's into. This is, I just want to briefly show you this. The top scene, and these are just little postage stamp size things, the top scene is the Good Shepherd, which he painted in 1903, 1917, 1922, 1930. That's also interesting. A painter who keeps coming back to something. Like, I'm never done painting the Good Shepherd looking for his sheep. And so all through his life, he's painting that. And then the bottom is the flight into Egypt. It's another scene that Tanner was never quite satisfied he'd painted the right way. So lots of scenes of the flight into Egypt. Again, it's a worldview issue, right? If you ask Tanner what's the most important thing spiritually going on in your reading of the Bible, he's going to say, the Good Shepherd is seeking his sheep, and we're living in a kind of exile where we're not at home and God takes care of us, but it's in our exile and on our flight to Egypt. Okay, well, there is much more to say about Tanner, but I've said all that, and I just want to end by showing you his picture again. Thank you for coming. I commend unto you the work of Henry Tanner and the experience of being a good steward of your eyes and your visual apparatus. Thanks a lot for coming out.